Is it possible that a small attitude, something so subtle you barely notice it, is quietly limiting your spiritual growth? Not a major sin, not a dramatic failure, but a quiet interior posture that slowly drains your peace and weakens your relationship with God. This is the question at the heart of today's reflection, inspired by the gentle yet penetrating wisdom of Saint Thérèse of Lisieux. Thérèse believed that the soul's progress toward God is often hindered not by obvious obstacles, but by the silent habits of the heart that operate unnoticed, attitudes we carry every day without examining them. She hinted at this reality when she described how a tiny grain of sand can blur the soul's vision, suggesting that even small interior resistances can cloud our ability to love with simplicity. She did not mean that God is harsh or easily displeased, but that spiritual growth requires self-awareness. We cannot offer God what we do not first recognize within ourselves. Perhaps the most common hidden attitude is self-reliance, the subtle belief that we must handle everything alone. It does not look dramatic on the surface. Many people carry it quietly: the pressure to appear strong, the fear of asking for help, the discomfort of admitting vulnerability. In a world that praises independence, this feels normal, but spiritually it can become poison. Self-reliance closes the heart, blocks grace, and prevents God from working freely. It creates a constant internal tension. I must fix myself. I must manage my life. I must hold everything together. When we rely only on ourselves, we leave no space for God's tenderness to enter. Thérèse teaches the opposite path, a disposition of spiritual childhood, not childishness, but childlike trust. For her, growth begins when we allow ourselves to be small before God, admitting our limitations without shame. She believed that God delights in our weakness when we bring it to Him, not when we hide it. This is where many people stumble. They think they need to be perfect before approaching God. They think they must resolve wounds, conquer temptations, or eliminate flaws before they deserve grace. But in reality, this attitude becomes the very thing that blocks grace. Another subtle attitude that often hinders growth is habitual discouragement. People rarely confess it. It slips into the heart quietly. The belief that I will never change, or I am too broken, or God must be tired of me. Discouragement paralyzes the soul. It convinces you to stop trying, to stop hoping, to stop expecting God's help. Thérèse confronted this with a strikingly simple truth. God is never tired of us. What tires Him is only our refusal to trust in His mercy. As we move through this teaching, keep listening inwardly. Which small attitude is quietly limiting your spiritual growth? Self-reliance, discouragement, comparison, control, resentment. Thérèse invites us to expose these subtle barriers, not to condemn ourselves, but to welcome healing. Small attitudes rarely announce themselves. They slip in quietly, almost invisibly, settling into the rhythm of our thoughts until they feel normal. Saint Thérèse of Lisieux understood this phenomenon well. She repeatedly emphasized that the spiritual life is shaped not by rare, grand moments, but by the 1,000 interior movements that fill each day. Our reactions, our tone, our interior posture, our silent thoughts about ourselves and others. These are the places where holiness begins or ends. One of the most subtle attitudes that blocks spiritual growth is comparison. It begins innocently. You notice someone else's success, someone else's holiness, someone else's peace. Then a whisper appears in the heart. Why am I not like that? Why do they have what I don't? Why do I struggle more? With time, this whisper becomes a lens through which you see your entire spiritual journey. You begin to measure yourself constantly, and in doing so, you forget that God leads every soul by a unique path. Thérèse resisted comparison fiercely. She once expressed the idea that comparing our soul to another is like comparing a wildflower to a rose. Each blooms differently, each has a place in God's garden, and each glorifies Him simply by being what it was created to be. When you compare yourself, you lose sight of what God is actually trying to cultivate within you. You try to bloom like someone else, and in the process, ignore the grace meant specifically for your heart. Another quiet attitude is internal impatience. not outward frustration, but the subtle tension of wanting instant progress. You want clarity now, healing now, holiness now. You want your weaknesses gone immediately, your struggles resolved, your wounds closed. But spiritual life unfolds slowly, and impatience pushes you to believe that nothing is happening, even when God is working beneath the surface. Thérèse understood that grace operates gently, almost imperceptibly, like roots growing in the dark earth. You do not see the growth until much later, and impatience can blind you to the quiet miracles already taking place. Then there is overthinking, an attitude especially common today. People analyze themselves endlessly, replay conversations, anticipate imaginary problems, and interpret every emotion as a crisis. Overthinking suffocates spiritual progress because it leaves no room for trust. It becomes a form of self-control disguised as caution. Thérèse would gently say, "Let God think for you," not meaning carelessness, but a willingness to surrender what you cannot understand. These small attitudes grow because we rarely stop to examine them. Life moves quickly, responsibilities pile up, emotions shift, and before we realize it, our spiritual path becomes tangled, not through grave sins, but through unnoticed patterns of thought and reaction. This is why Thérèse's spirituality remains so relevant. She encourages us to pay attention to the interior world with kindness, not judgment. She teaches that awareness is the first step toward freedom. As you reflect, ask yourself, which of these subtle attitudes resonates with me? Which one is quietly shaping my reactions, my prayers, my relationships? Every small attitude carries a deeper emotional root. On the surface, comparison, impatience, or self-reliance may appear harmless, but underneath them lies something much more vulnerable. Saint Thérèse understood this with astonishing clarity. She knew that attitudes are not random. They grow from unmet needs, unhealed wounds, and unspoken fears. If we want to overcome the attitude that blocks our spiritual growth, we must understand the emotion feeding it. Take comparison, for example. At its root is the fear of not being enough. When you compare yourself to others, what you are really saying is, "I'm afraid that who I am is inadequate." Comparison is not an intellectual habit. It is an emotional cry. It grows in places where confidence is weak, where identity is fragile, where love has not yet healed the heart. Thérèse would respond to this not with correction, but with tenderness. She would remind you that what God desires is not your perfection, but your trust. You do not need to compete in God's eyes, you only need to belong. Now consider impatience. Beneath impatience usually lies anxiety, the fear that God is late, that nothing will change, that you must force an outcome. Impatience grows when the soul feels threatened by uncertainty. In modern life, uncertainty is everywhere, and people carry silent fear in their bodies without realizing it. You want clarity, direction, and visible progress because uncertainty feels unsafe. But Thérèse would say that true peace comes not from knowing the path, but from knowing the one who guides the path. Impatience fades when trust deepens. Then there is self-reliance. It may look like strength, but often it is built on the fear of being disappointed or abandoned. Many people have learned, through painful experiences, that relying on others leads to hurt. So they build emotional walls, take control of everything, and avoid vulnerability. But spiritually, self-reliance becomes a barrier because it keeps God at a distance. Thérèse gently invites the soul to rest instead of controlling. She teaches that God does not want us to be self-sufficient. He wants us to be open. Perhaps the most subtle emotional root is discouragement. Discouragement grows from shame, the belief that you have failed too many times, that you are too weak, too inconsistent, too broken. Shame convinces you that God is disappointed in you, even though Thérèse insisted the opposite. She believed that God is most drawn to the soul that feels incapable, because incapacity invites mercy. Discouragement shrinks when you begin to see yourself with God's eyes, not as a failure, but as someone still learning how to love. These emotional roots matter because spiritual growth cannot happen if the heart stays hidden behind defenses. God does not want just your behavior. He wants your inner truth. He wants access to the place where the attitude was born. Thérèse's little way begins here, not with forcing change, but with noticing what hurts. naming what scares you and allowing God to enter gently. Healing begins when you stop pretending and start revealing. The attitude blocking your growth is not your enemy. It is a sign pointing to where God wants to meet you next. One of the most remarkable qualities of Saint Thérèse of Lisieux is that she never denied her own weaknesses. She never pretended to be spiritually strong or emotionally unshakable. Instead, she learned to transform every small attitude, every fear, every impatience, every insecurity, into something God could use. She did not wait for heroic moments to grow in holiness. She used the small interior struggles as her training ground. This is where her spirituality becomes profoundly practical for us today. Thérèse discovered that spiritual growth does not depend on eliminating weakness, but on redirecting it. If she felt comparison rising in her heart, she did not shame herself. She lifted that moment to God and transformed it into prayer. Lord, thank you for what you are doing in her life. Help me trust what you are doing in mine. In doing this, she turned a destructive attitude into an act of love. The comparison did not disappear instantly, but it lost its power. When impatience stirred within her, she did not collapse into guilt. Instead, she recognized that impatience was an opportunity to exercise trust. She would remind herself that God's timing is perfect, even when it feels hidden. She would breathe, surrender the moment, and allow the tension to soften. Over time, the pattern changed, not because she forced it, but because grace entered through the very place where she struggled. Thérèse also practiced spiritual smallness, a posture in which she embraced her limitations instead of fighting them. This was not weakness, it was confidence in God's love. She realized that when she could not overcome a fault on her own, that very inability became an offering. It became the place where God's strength could work. This attitude freed her from perfectionism and opened her to mercy. Imagine how different your life would feel if you stopped trying to fix everything alone and instead allowed your need to draw you closer to God rather than further from Him. Another core principle of Thérèse's spirituality was intentional gentleness. She believed that violence against oneself, constant self-criticism, harsh judgment, unrealistic expectations kills spiritual growth. She treated her soul with the same tenderness she believed God felt toward her. If discouragement appeared, she would speak to herself like a child who needs reassurance, not punishment. She understood that the soul grows best in an atmosphere of patience, compassion, and warmth. This is especially relevant today. Many people believe that discipline must be harsh, that change must be rigid, that holiness must be stern. But Thérèse shows another way. Growth born from gentleness, not force. Strength built through surrender, not strain. Transformation rooted in trust, not pressure. Her approach teaches us something essential. The small attitude blocking your growth is not a permanent barrier. It is the doorway through which God wants to lead you deeper. If you feel comparison, impatience, self-reliance, or discouragement, these are not signs of failure. They are invitations. They are the very places where grace can enter if you let it. Recognizing the small attitude that blocks your spiritual growth is important, but transformation truly begins when you bring this awareness into the ordinary moments of your daily life. Saint Thérèse believed holiness is built within the simple rhythm of today. Not tomorrow, not next week, not once you get your life together. Her little way is practical, lived, and achievable for every person who desires to grow closer to God. Let us take the attitudes we discussed and translate them into real situations. If comparison has been shaping your heart, begin by catching it in the moment it appears. When you feel that familiar tightening, when you see someone else's blessings or progress and feel suddenly smaller, pause. Let that moment become prayer instead of self-criticism. Say quietly in your heart, Lord, thank you for the gifts you have given them. Help me trust the gifts you are growing within me. This simple redirection transforms comparison into humility. It softens insecurity and builds gratitude. With repetition, the interior grip loosens. If your struggle is impatience, treat the moment like a training exercise. When you are stuck in traffic, waiting for an answer, or dealing with someone who moves slower than you do, remember, impatience reveals your attachment to control. Instead of spiraling into frustration, breathe deeply and say, God, I trust your timing more than my own. This is not just spiritual language, it is a practical retraining of the nervous system. Over time, this practice teaches your body and soul to find peace even when circumstances remain unresolved. If your subtle barrier is self-reliance, begin practicing small acts of dependence. Ask for help in minor tasks. Share your heart with someone you trust. Admit when you are tired instead of pretending you are fine. And most importantly, speak to God honestly. Lord, I cannot do this alone. This vulnerable admission is not weakness. It is the start of spiritual maturity. You are not meant to carry life without grace. Every time you surrender even a small portion of your burden, you open the door for God to act. And if your struggle is discouragement, practice gentleness with yourself. When you fall into an old pattern or fail to meet your ideals, resist the instinct to condemn yourself. Instead, remind your heart, God is patient with me. I will be patient with myself. Allow His mercy to reshape the way you speak to yourself. Discouragement begins to lose power when you stop treating yourself like an enemy and begin treating yourself like a soul in need of love. In each of these examples, the key is not perfection. It is awareness and willingness. Thérèse's entire spiritual path is built on small, repeated gestures of trust. Not dramatic spiritual victories, not flawless behavior. Simple acts of surrender practiced consistently. And here is the deeper truth. The moment you recognize the attitude blocking your growth, you have already taken the first step toward freedom. God is not waiting for you to fix it. He is waiting for you to reveal it. Let today become a day of noticing. Let the quiet moments become opportunities. Let the small struggle become the offering. When Saint Thérèse of Lisieux spoke of her little way, she was not offering a poetic idea or a comforting philosophy. She was describing a spiritual reality she lived every day, that God meets the soul in what is small, hidden, and humble. He does not wait for you to achieve greatness before He comes close. He comes close in the places you least expect, often in the very area of your life where you feel the most inadequate. This is the surprising truth. The small attitude that has been blocking your spiritual growth is not a sign of failure. It is an invitation. It is the place where God desires to enter more deeply. It is the place where His grace can do what your effort cannot. Thérèse understood this profoundly. She learned that human weakness, instead of disqualifying the soul, draws God like a magnet. Why? Because weakness opens the door to trust, and trust is the soil where grace takes root. Think of a child learning to walk. The child wobbles, falls, tries again, falls again. The parent is not disappointed. The parent is delighted by the effort, touched by the desire, moved by the determination. In the same way, God is not standing over you with a list of expectations. He is beside you, watching your small efforts with tenderness. Your growth is not measured by how often you succeed, but by how often you return to Him. Thérèse would insist that the soul must stop pretending to be strong. Pretending creates distance. Honesty creates intimacy. When you tell God, I am struggling, you are already praying. When you admit this small attitude is blocking me, you are already surrendering. When you whisper, help me, you are already opening the door to grace. And as grace enters, something shifts. Slowly, quietly, almost imperceptibly, the attitude that once felt heavy begins to lighten. You begin noticing moments of clarity, moments when old reactions soften, when anger fades more quickly, when comparison loses its sting, when patience grows naturally without forcing it. This is how transformation happens in the little way. Not through sudden victories, but through gentle evolution. Spiritual growth in Thérèse's vision is not a climb upward, it is a surrender downward. She believed the soul grows not by elevating itself, but by allowing God to carry it, like a child lifted into the arms of a loving parent. And in those arms, all the small attitudes that once controlled you begin to lose their influence. They dissolve not through effort, but through trust. So let this teaching rest in your heart. Your greatest obstacle may become your greatest pathway to God. Your most stubborn attitude may become the place of deepest intimacy. Your smallest struggle may become your most meaningful offering. Thérèse teaches us that holiness is nothing more than love lived sincerely, day after day, in the smallest details. And when you offer even the smallest attitude to God, honestly, gently, courageously, He receives it with joy. Because He knows that from that small seed, an entire garden of grace can grow.